road that you would have taken
In the old days.
Yes, Nashville.
Yeah. I spent a couple of weeks in Nashville in the General Hospital in 44. I have a kidney stone removed. It was a peculiar experience because the enemy was operating on me, I wasn't quite sure about that thing.
How did they treat you? Who did they treat you?
In the hospital?
Yeah.
Well, are you having a microphone or something here?
Yes.
Well, you have to tell people.
I'm sorry. I was just testing it out to make sure everything was working. And then,
yeah, you're slick. You're slick.
I have a microphone here, Gerhard. It's on right now.
The operating officer, a lieutenant colonel, Balding, was very competent. He also believed in the practice. You know what a cystoscope is? A cystoscope?
Yes.
It's a piece of metal they ram down your thing. He also believed in doing that without any anesthesia. Well, that was bad enough. But after about an hour or so, I had to let some water. Well, I tell you, I had to hold on to the walls of that particular restroom. It was nasty. Then the operation was fine, local anesthesia, and I kind of could feel him pluck around there in the back. I have a 6-inch scar, and obviously got the stone out, and I had asked that they keep the stone for me. I thought that would be an interesting memento. And so they did, and put it off of cotton. I put it on my night table. Well, about 36 hours later, I had terrific pain because the bloating intestines were pressing on that large incision. And I had a somewhat, I'll use a mild term, a somewhat detached nurse, unfriendly, and didn't like the enemy in the first place. Well, lo and behold, during the night, she took that cotton piece away on the stone. She stole my stone. And 6 weeks later, I was playing soccer again. I was one of the leading soccer players. And at about that time, from Trinidad, Colorado. Yeah. And so the first evening when he was introduced to the gang at the dinner table, there was also an announcement that tomorrow I would play for the first time again for our compound. So he would go around later on in life and tell these stories about him in the POW camp. But he never let on to his inner struggle. Never. He was not a revealing man.
Your father was from Trinidad?
Trinidad, Colorado. He was transferred from Trinidad, Colorado, his prison camp, to Crossville because he knew where I was when he was taken to Normandy. And so he was transferred and had to pay for it and had to pay for the guard to come to Crossville. And we were together for the last year or so of our captivity. Very interesting and certainly newsworthy. Everybody, your father is with you.
And did you share the room with him or what?
No, that was the first word came out that my father would join me, in Crossville. Well, surely you're going to move together. I said, hell no. Because I hated nothing more than patronage from my father in the military. He was a signal corps officer also. Patronage from my father. You know, I just wanted to make it on my own, you know. And yes, he did exercise one act of patronage. I was in the labor camp in 39, and students who could claim, graduates from high school, who could claim that they would go on to study at the universities. Why, after 6 months or 7 months on the secret ditches and so on, they were allowed to leave the labor service. And they didn't need to give any proof or show papers of admission or anything like that. So most of them left because labor service was not a pleasant affair. But I had no particular intention of studying. I thought I might, as soon as possible, the war had begun, join the military, so I stayed in their camp. So my grandmother, who was my special patron saint, must have worked on my father. Now, Fritz, she said, you get him out of there. She didn't want me to get stuck in some labor service camp and miss life or miss the war or whatever. But one day he came unannounced. He was a captain by then in the armed forces. And saw the camp leader, who was a captain in the... And in so many words, the labor service guys had great respect of the real military. So he quickly persuaded our camp leader that I was also one who would go and study. So within 24 hours, I got out of that camp. And then a month later, joined in occupied Poland. So that was the only time, but I think my father got pushed around by his mother-in-law. Volunteered for service in Russia at age 52 or 53. Was 2.5 years in Russia as a battalion commander. And then in 44, they were transferred to France. And he had himself captured. Not voluntarily. He had one interesting observation. Is this all right? Of interest? I know you are recording or something. He got to know Russia rather well, especially the southern half, Ukraine, so on, as much as a German soldier or Russian. Spoke a little, I guess. And coming to America and seeing this vast expanse provided me with a very deep insight, which hasn't left me. He was a sharp guy. But he saw real similarities between Russia and the USA. Mostly the spaciousness. And of course, geography forms a people, a nation, not just her history. And it has gone with me with some similarities, certainly in the landscape, in the vast vistas as you go out west and all of that, the immense fields, and, between the two countries. But the resemblance may also be more subtle and profound at the same time, and I translate it into the present in the following way. That many Americans see and have been conditioned to see today in the breakup of the Soviet Union, the triumph of Western democracy, and in particular, the capitalistic democracy. We got them licked for these tenuous similarities. I cannot help now and then but have an uneasy feeling as if the breakup of the Union along lines of separate nations within the great distance between the centralizing government and the suffering people. That particular is not the result of American superiority in terms of democracy, because of the similarities that I seem to sense. It may well be that in the end, the Russian breakup, the Soviet breakup, may be but a precursor to this that already are latent in our own country. That is, if we see something in Toynbee's theory of fissures developing in a society, and it was internal contradictions in the Soviet Union that brought her down, which I think is more likely, then we do well about statements of superiority. Can you follow me, or does it go against your grain? Is there something to the observation? Huh? And I don't see it get any better for all the glossy and wonderful economy that seems to hide it than to reduce it. Am I off?
No, I don't think so. You get people like Pat Buchanan who exacerbate this.
Well, I mean, I listened to him the other day when he announced his separation from the Republican Party, and it struck me as certainly not as constructive. Casablanca, Morocco, why you had a pretty soft job. And he looked it. And he was the colonel that we got on the soccer field, and he promptly broke a leg, you know. He never took it out on us. He was very jovial kind of sort. But he lost 40 pounds, and we had a few that lost that much within 4 or 5 months after the end of the war. The re-educational score, yes. And the thing that all of a sudden hit the Americans that this was not right or not good was that I think it was noontime or morning, no, it was roll call in the morning. And we had a rather artistic interpreter from Berlin, and he looked artistic, had long hair, just trifle feminine. At any rate, and he wasn't the strongest sort to begin with. But in the middle of the roll call, the interpreter keeled over. And that set off a little alarm bell, you know, against official policy that our rations would be reduced. And then we went on a hunger strike because of the fact that we thought we were entitled to decent rations.
How long did the hunger strike last?
3 days. And I had a very competent and trusted senior officer who negotiated with the Americans. And the thing ended by a petition to the American colonel that a Swiss delegation, Red Cross, should come and inspect the conditions in the camp, especially the rationing of food.
You mentioned yesterday the YMCA. Was
Yeah.
it the local one or was it the
I have a hunch that it was at the state level or somewhat high up, with which, especially in the first year or two, some of the American officers got, and we had money to buy, and the YMCA provided sports equipment, recreation things, music instruments, plenty,
I read that one German prisoner was reading books that were officially banned in Germany.
That would fit. You use the opportunity,
I know your father came in, 93 or 43?
No, he came just before Christmas, 1944. He'd been taken in Normandy.
Were you and your father, or any of the prisoners here, were actually able to have correspondence with family back home? It seems like the American prisoners, in many cases, were able to get.
To the best of my knowledge, this was reciprocal. That the American prisoners in Germany were given coupons at the same grade level as we were here to buy their extras, mostly beer in the case of Crossville for some of us. The letter writing for us was on impregnated paper. You could not write with invisible ink or fool the censors. I believe they were censored. We were counseled to write about things concerning our daily life, not about things that might have caused the censor to strike it. 20, 25 lines by normal handwriting. We had to give you a POW number.
Was it censored here in the camp? Or was it
To the best of my knowledge, it was censored here, just as letters from Germany were censored in Germany. I think that was the pattern.
I don't know what they had written, but they were marking out. Letters from here that actually cut the stuff out.
Yes, we had communication.
But I also read that in the German authorities censored sometimes the letters from POW.
May well have been.
They told that they had good food or good treatment. They didn't want people.
It would make sense. Albertson? How would I know his name? Coming back to the United States. What was his name? Zielinski or some Polish sounding name? Or Silesian?
He was a studious person. He got a year's credit.
Well, so did I.
When he went to the university in Munich.
He took the vet classes, right?
Yeah, so did I. University of Minnesota. I have my certificates for 2 semesters.
I had an aunt that lived in the U.S.
I did not know it.
He wrote a nice little write-up, not as long as yours.
He did that after he came here. I told him he was telling stories of the ancient and writing. He said he told me, when it happened to kids and friends, they come over here before, and they had lived in Germany. They were all prisoners here. And somebody came in the early 50s and 60s, later, in a film, and he said they get together and watch what happened and what they were.
Wow, yeah.
Well, the publications in Germany were sort of like our But at the, I don't know whether it was in the morning or evening session, pastors were saying that the Crossville people had been told by the government. I had never heard that.
I was told those that were here, they were not supposed to take pictures. They were supposed to probably would be really mad. I thought it was really I've never heard all the words.
Yeah, I never knew about this breakout attempt someone mentioned. And then that it was a small group, if they did it at all. Well, POWs.
Someone asked you about the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I am sure that they did tunnel.
But I think it was never discovered at the time.
Afterwards,
When
the tunnel was, they had air shafts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was fertilizer.
Obviously, they would not want to share it with, except the smaller.
What I've heard that it was a group of submarines. I guess you had a small group of submarines.
Well, now that's interesting. That's interesting.
So they wouldn't be afraid of people on the rock.
Well, I don't know.
You could argue that. But I knew those guys personally. I've been thrown together with two submarine in one of the camps south of the city of Algiers, who told me the story how their U-boat was bombed, and by the explosion of the bombs underneath, thrown up to the surface. Asked me to bring this report back home if I ever got through. They knew I was planning to absent myself and get to Spanish Morocco and so on. And tell responsible people in the submarine force about the fact that in the Mediterranean, while the new U-boats had an unbelievable depth capability, because of the sun intensity, could still be seen at, I forget what the number was, at 180 feet depth, something like that. And that it was important for the people in charge in Germany to realize that the U-boats that made it through the Strait of Gibraltar, not many did, were that. And I said, well, if I ever got through, I'll tell them. Now, not only that, two of those guys were in Crossville. I met them again. Not only that, their commanding officer, a guy who had I think he may have had the night cross with leaves, who had sunk something like 100,000 tons of ships, was here and was fairly promptly transferred to the camp down in Georgia where they collected the Nazis. And he was quite he must have been quite a guy. And I met him briefly. But so this U-boat business, I wouldn't be surprised. These guys, they were resourceful. Resourceful.
But they all ended up at the concrete wall.
Periodically, the fence will go down, and then they'll just go over, and they would have another barrier, and they hit one wall in another way, and just happen to go left, and the story is if they would have went right,
they might have had an opening.
Yeah, it would have been open.
I think it's a wonderful.
They hit one twice. They just happened to turn the wrong way.
I never knew, and I found it extremely difficult and risky to get out of a place like the Crossville fences.
Well, I don't think you're going to. Pictures I had, especially if you couldn't get near them. The tunnels, you should have to tunnel a long way.
I'd be afraid. Auger. I wonder what they got to do with water. Those are the water. Cool, we have. Well, I had several that the way I understood everything that they took from here when they got the train to leave. Their suits and their baggage and everything on which side of the train back to the so they did nothing. They lost everything that they lost.
Our friends, according to this,
Turn over. $100,000 million, and I'm sure it's
the same.
sometimes
So-called traders who looked like he was an attorney or judge from an unfriendly, a very sharp guy. Why, and a signal corps. Why, a big pond was created because some debris and dirt and leaves and so on had blocked one of the major drainage pipes in camp number 4 into the woods. Betting was only by the case. One guy bet with me that Koblenz was not the capital of the Rhineland. Now that's a foolish thing to do because I came from Koblenz.
And you knew the answer.
Sure, prove it, So got a case of beer. But this guy, who looked everything but the sporty type, desk man, glasses, not very fit, Why, he was a big, brown, dirty, ice-cold pool. Must be February or something like that. The couple made a bet. I think it was about 3 cases of beer. And it was maybe 110 feet or something like that across. he would swim across that pool. Well, half the compound was assembled to watch him, And by golly, he made it through collectively 3 cases. Oh, there was a lot of fun, and of course it went with an awful lot of drinking.
talked about the deals that you had. I heard they say the gallon pickled and mayonnaise.
Right. Under the barracks and so on, yeah.
Inspired by the Tennessee history.
Well, we didn't know much about that, but it wasn't a thing to do. It became a fashion,
Well, you couldn't buy liquor here or beer here if
You could buy beer. Yeah, that's right.
Were the guards able to get beer?
No.
Because
We got it at the PX or whatever it was.
So the guards were able to buy beer as well?
I do not know, and I don't think.
I would doubt it. This PX thing was in the prison part. The guards didn't really go in there. They simply stayed on the outside watching.
The contact with the guards was actually very slight.
The camp was run by the Germans.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly.
They cooked for themselves. Anything they did, watching.
The contact with the guards was actually very slight.
The camp was run by the Germans.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly.
They cooked for themselves. Anything they did, they did it all.
Was in the compound.
If they worked in the offices over here, that'd be the only one that had that contact.
But later on, then I think may only have been enlisted men.
You want me to get that video to watch the video?
we have that's in the archive too now. If you want to see that again, I made a copy.
Heartland Street, they're about 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
Real short.
But I had a copy made at
Ultimately, got who does the Heartland Street.
yes, yeah, that'd be interesting for you to see. It's a very quick video about the camp
He did a thing.
Sure.
afterwards.
I'd like to go up there. I'm going up in the morning.
Yeah. Mom and I have been talking about Sanctuary, but
I got to be back in the afternoon, but I'm going up in the morning.
decided to come back to the United States.
Oh, well,
I came home on January 30th, 1946, and immigrated to the States on January 6, 1953, with our young family.
funny.
Signal Corps units at the division level were horse-strong. And I came to officer school in the spring of 41. In North Africa, for North Africa, all the units were mechanized. The Italians had some infantry units that actually marched across the desert. We were all mechanized. Well, that may have been Air Force. Without glasses, I'm blind. Yes, man, oh man. If anyone is taking any pictures later on to share, I mean, my family would love this.
I've got copies of these.
The only thing that would interest them, you know. Iron Cross first class. This is a Panther man. And we didn't have anyone with Panther uniforms until 1944, when they came from Normandy. I don't recognize any one of them, and they may have been in another compound.
I have some more pictures I'll show you.
Yeah.
With their
And who is this? Do you remember this?
No, his name should be on there.
Well, this is in our, and there was behind one of the barracks a kind of, what would you call that, a veranda or something like that. And this is where the nice music band.
Well, that's the band on the.
Yeah.
But this is the
Right,
same
this
picture.
is the same picture. You can see, and here's the fat colonel that we got on the soccer field. He was of long lineage. We used to say in Germany, his lineage or his castle and so on goes back to 1300, and he'd never been outside the house. This was the commandant for a while. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And I think he was transferred to the local Nazi camp. These were first and second lieutenants. I remember the guy by face who played the guitar.
He is supposed to be one of these groups.
That may well be
This was
so. I don't
A
remember.
Christmas picture that was taken here that they sent home to his family.
Yeah, I had the same kind of picture taken. It cost $5. That was the first lieutenant, but he may.
He was the overlieutenant.
Yes, but I don't know him. Don't know him. Yeah, but I remember these guys, and they played Viennese tunes, and I mean, this may have been the camp interpreter, the one with the long hair and the kind of, you know, kind of finer features, who keeled over on that one occasion.
Like a very pleasant scene.
This was fun.
Yeah,
That's one I called down.
that's the one who died.
I don't remember that either. This
Now-
was one of the pictures?
Yeah,
Probably.
last night you remember they were talking
Yeah.
about it, and this painter who did the painting in mind.
Difficult it would have been to get out of the camp.
So this was the recreation. Look how beautiful.
Yes.
Now, you had an officers' club, or whatever you want to call it, and it was supposed to have paintings.
Maybe
That may well have been so. But you see, you did break up a little bit into the four of these compounds, and the cliques were forming in context. And also, you broke up by function.
But Mr. Albertson, I know he was in the first camp, number one.
Number one, they were the lead, and we were in camp number 4. We came somewhat later because they were.
And yours were later, because that's where the Italians used to stay.
Uh-huh. I was in camp number 4, in compound number 4, and so the cliques were forming naturally by the barracks, by the way they were together, and they were forming about the special interests that they had. Well, I played soccer and tennis. You know, that was my interest, and I taught English. But my buddy from Koblenz died earlier this year. Why, he got much of his study in medicine done here in Crossville, and of course applied the credit when he began after the war in Germany. And so I studied at the University of Minnesota, and my little credit book and so on. You know, we had a real university going. As I said, I think it was just over 500 subjects.
And you have the German
Have a
prescription on how to run these schools, because he was
Sure.
he was directed by the. I have a certificate.
Well, this is really something that coming. Yeah, but this I remember the afternoon on a day like this, you know, the band would play, you know, the severe. It was great. Well, let's look. Conrad, you
Go
lead
ahead.
us.
Gerhard,
Yes.
can I ask you one question?
Certainly.
Would you describe to me sort of how the setup of the pits were, approximately how close you could come, the space and the height?
Well, I believe this is inside or outside. I better get my glasses. I don't know which is outside.
Inside.
Right is inside or left is inside? Yeah, right is inside. Well, here you see the barracks, and this was at one of the areas where the runoff is from the plateau where most of them were. This may be camp number 5. At any rate, so the 10 feet would be somewhere at this grade, at this slope, as it gets steeper. And it was level in most places. I'm not sure anymore whether soldiers, guards, actually walked in between, and the spaces of the spaces between the towers were what? A couple of 100 feet, something like that. And of course the guards were there, and we always laughed a little bit, ridiculed their non-military behavior, you know, but the captain would,
One with even a shirt.
the captain would come by, you know, and the guy would kind of look, oh, everything okay, Captain, you know, unimaginable in the German army where they would snap to attention, you know, that kind of thing. And that always impressed me because I was impressed by a more civilian society and not the kind of snap to attention that they had in the German army. Yes, with their feet dangling over the railing, yeah, everything is okay.
Were they local, the guys?
No. No, I don't think so. If it's so bad. Now, this is the entrance here. The soccer field was here, and we're below that. Any one of the barracks was not properly aligned, but that may be. No, the main avenue of the camp went in that direction toward camp number 4 on the right-hand side. You see 2 barracks. I told you the story about that big pond there, and that's where the runoff was between those 2 barracks on the right, 4 barracks in the rear, and the mess hall, the long vertical building near the lane in camp number 4. You see, and I work on the right-hand side, the left one, and my father then was put into a staff officer barrack. They had more space and got more money right near the fence. So this is company 1, 2, 3, and at the far end, number 4. 5 and 6 were enlisted. You see the fairly large building on the left-hand side of the main street. and that was the assembly hall, where special things were celebrated. And on April 30th or whenever it was, we had our last, in that sense, military assembly with the announcement that he killed himself or had died fighting in the ruins of Berlin, as we said. To the left was a large drainage area. You see the open area here in this model, and that's where they had built a real theater on rising ground with steps, and that's where they played this production of Juliet. And I think it was competitive with say, the City Theater in Koblenz. And we used all these, I explained that yesterday, all these cans in silver and in gold, and they made real uniforms. So you saw these Roman soldiers running across the scene, and their armor was tingling, and they're rattling. And I tell you, it was some production. And the American camp leaders and some soldiers had front seats, you know, and they were clapping and not quite knowing what was going on. They knew probably as little about Caesar as some of us, you know.
Which building was the
I'm not sure. This is where I think on the left-hand side, as I look at it here, is that longish building, and that was the assembly hall. Now the PX was further down, almost at the borderline between Camp 4 and 5. It was a relatively small barrack, but I do think that in this regard, this model is not accurate.
So there were
6 companies, 6 compounds.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
What's the building just below the assembly hall? It has a little peak on it. Is that a church or a chapel?
I don't remember that either. I was under the impression that whole area, except for the assembly hall, was declined toward the left, and there were some runoffs.
It's possible that could be some kind of
It could have been the canteen. The canteen. There was no chapel inside the inside the warded off area. If there was that, it was somewhere in the and here's the movie house where we saw that dreadful film.
And this recreation hall or assembly hall, would that have those tanks?
Probably, although I do not remember that. I do remember the activity that we had some people that were very intense on expressing their artwork and so on. Some were wood carving, others were painting. I think some people worked with metal, and very gifted with their hands. And of course, plenty of time on our hands.
Well, judging by the motives are Bavarian.
Well, then I would have stayed away from that in the first place. No, not very true, but I'm not obviously I'm not Bavarian.
Gary,
Yes.
could I ask you just in the microphone to read the signage of them again?
In English, vom Zaun wegbleiben. Stay from the fence.
Key point here.
Okay. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Now this
Thank
may
you.
have been
This is
more
just
outside, isn't it?
Yeah, just some items. There were 3 MP groups here, 3 18 and 3 16 with the 2 military police groups. Those were the
Okay.
guards that-
Interesting, yes.
This is mainly some stuff from that. Some of the animals that we found digging.
You've done a wonderful job. I mean. What about you, Gary? Is this interesting to you? Is it Chris for you?
This is the type of bed that they had in the hospital.
It looks short.
Well, I don't know. Well, if the guy was exceptionally tall, the same with him as they did in the Greek history, which you know very well, they would cut his feet off so that he would fit. Don't put that.
What is this? What is the flag from?
Well, the
Is
flag.
this from the camp?
Yeah, that's what I was told. It was left here. They had German flags that they put up.
This may well be. It may well have been so.
Were the prisoners allowed to fly Nazi flag.
I would
In the
assume
camp.
that there was no proscription to that. Yes. Just as it was permitted to wear your insignia and wear your, especially something like the German cross, which we would call Brunhild's Tits.
Right.
Oh, no, it was protruding, a big swastika on top. So the name for that was her teeth. I have a strong mistake. Brunhild is one of those Germanic Valkyries. I thought it was a proper expression of, times to change. And if someone had the night cross, we call it spinach.
Flag hanging.
Although we did not salute with the Nazi salute until after July 20th, 1944, when it became mandatory. We kept, well, because it was like that, and this was one way of expressing loyalty to him. We continued to salute in fashion. And there were no Nazis in that official sense, or party-related units in North Africa. Rommel did not have any what he called Praetorian guard. He was, by that time, very disenchanted already with the system, and became ever more so, which led them to his being implicated in the plot, although he may not have had any.
Since you worked,
No.
well, not really with him, but you were under him.
I was somewhere down below.
Didn't he commit suicide?
He did.
I mean, how did the camp feel when he had heard the news?
Rommel was severely injured in a strafing attack by British planes near his headquarters on the Seine River, not far from Paris. Around, I would say early in July 1944. His driver was killed, as were a couple before. His command car turned over, went into a ditch. He came to lie under the car, had very serious head injuries and other injuries. Was not expected, was sent home for a long recuperation. Tough as he was, made it through this normally deadly injury. Was on home furlough, and two generals from headquarters of Hitler's cabal came and after half an hour of private talk with the field marshal, he came out and said, well, I have to go with these gentlemen, said goodbye to his wife. He was still badly scarred, and about an hour, and said goodbye to his son, who was about 13 or 14, later Lord Mayor of Stuttgart. They drove off in the direction of Ulm, and within an hour and a half, he was delivered to that hospital in Ulm, a dead man, on the understanding then and the publicity pertaining thereto, that he had died after all from his very serious injuries. A state funeral had already been ordered before the sent. And so there was a state funeral presided over by the senior officer in the German army, Field Marshal Rundstedt, who was not informed, naturally, about the background to his death. But the most striking thing about this sordid affair, for a man of Rommel's integrity and so on and competence, was when you look at his death mask, there is an expression of utter contempt on that face. So if you ask what happened to the man or whoever, that's the story about Rommel's destiny. And he was implicated because the had drawn up a list of people who might be used in a new civilian government to be at least acceptable to the Western Allies. And his name was prominently on that list. And among friends here, I have always thought that his chief of staff might have been
von Stauffenberg.
von Stauffenberg had nothing to do with that. The chief of staff was General Speidel, also Dürrenberger. Rommel was not a Prussian officer or anything like that. He was stout, short. Not always very well because he'd been in the desert for 2 years and he had the shits and jaundice and so on. But I still believe, because in the that I've read in the film that I saw recently about the events of the 20th of July 1944, was that this General Speidel wiggled out of it, was the term. Well, you did not easily wiggle out of conspirators on July 20th, 1944, and having your life intact. And I just have always had just a bit of suspicion that he kind of turned the field marshal. The field marshal was not directly in the plot. In fact, 8 o'clock or so, the bell would ring near the mess hall. We would run for breakfast or walk for breakfast. We would gather after breakfast for roll call. We had 1 or 2, maybe 3 in our compound of 100 men or so who were late in the morning. You know, there are people who can't get up in the morning. They can stay up all night, but they can't get up in the morning. So my roommate was one of those. And by the time they were beginning to call the names, his began with a W. He came running, sneaking behind the barracks, quickly going into place. You know. So you had roll call after breakfast. And then you had leisure time, of which there was plenty. Lunch was maybe around 12 o'clock. The Bellwood noon was mostly sports for people like me, tennis, soccer. Of course, later on we had a whole university going, and so there were subjects taught and learned, and I mean everything. I learned German, English shorthand, which came very handy later on when I worked in international meetings, so I could take notes and so on. I went for Spanish for beginners and taught 2 classes in English. My father sat there, you know, trying to learn English, which was very hard for him, especially the pronunciation. Then around 6 or so, it was supper time, you know, bell would ring. The evening, as far as I'm concerned, was spent by playing cards, Skat, S-K-A-T, a German kind of man's game, rough and ready, fists banging, you know, and all this kind of stuff, and heavy drinking. Beer, you know, like going on beer binges the way you have with students today, you know. I was the same. I was 21 when I came to Crossville, so we had plenty of beer. Then there was, for officers, there was no curfew. So the nights extended into the morning, you know. And, I told the story already to 1 or 2 that by the time we were half full and had to go out and spring a leak, you know, you couldn't distinguish between a man standing there quietly or a juniper bush. You know that. Where's Conrad? Let's see what I can. I have a hunch that might have been the heating plant. Conrad, in hindsight, some didn't think so.
How much was the beer?
I forget. But you could buy an awful lot of beer for $20. And then the captains were given $30. And my father, as a major, was given $40, which was a very respectable sum. You know, and he had none of he didn't drink, he didn't smoke and so on. So he turned it into books and, you know. No, we had a good life, and behind it as a background, you also knew once you were a POW, and especially in America, you were reasonably sure that you would survive the war. I think if they'd sent me to Russia, it might have been a different equation.
When you come back here, what's the first thing that struck you? What's the first thing you thought of?
When I came back today, well, there's nothing left of the camp. That's certainly the first impression when you a compound of very nice buildings, 4-H camp. It bears no resemblance. I think the second quick reaction is when I look at these pictures. You know, that recalls the way it was. When I think of that little scene where we were sitting in the sun, you know, yes, it's not like coming home, but it's certainly a memorial trip. You know, or look at the compound, or some of these things, or hear these stories. You know, what distance from the fence, stuff like that. You know, all seems to be familiar. The problem you have is, can you quickly jump over the distance in time and distance in place when you compare my life today with my life in 1943? First impression, this is not our camp. The second, oh yeah, I've seen it. And then the worms come out of the woodwork. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Who were born at that time easily was lost in war. Easily. I just told him that out of 8, only 2 came back. Vintage 1922. We have no conception in America about these losses. No conception. Heavy though they were, and sad and all of it. About 8 million Germans were in war. 20 million Russians. And maybe 400,000 Americans, 350,000, something like that. Every family, every house was touched, was smitten by it. And soldiers died. And the very sad thing is, and it continues to this very day, if you want to put something as sad as that into your notes, the